June 1967. The Sinai Peninsula is a huge graveyard for men and military equipment. It is also a graveyard for dreams. Who remembers the dreams of Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, the greatest Arab leader in the 20th century? Other Arab rulers ignored their people. Nasser seemed to embody their hopes. The dream of a mighty and unified Arab nation. That idea died in just 6 days. Nasser loses his army, his air force, and his dream. 3 years later, at 52 years old, Nasser will have a heart attack. His friends say he died of a broken heart. What remains of Nasser's dream of modern and secular Arab states, free from post-colonial influences? An Arab world plagued by religious extremism and autocratic regimes. The victors of the war have their dreams too, of ancient lands and holy sites. But in the photo of the conquering generals entering Jerusalem, someone is missing. A man who fought to avoid war. Who remembers the dreams of Levi Eshkol, Israel's prime minister? He's Nasser's opposite. He's a manager. He has no charisma. He's the butt of jokes. Above all, Eshkol is a man of compromise. He tries to find a path to peace, to hold back the political hawks and the confident generals. But he fails. And not long after the war, at 74, he, like Nasser, dies of a heart attack. His wife says he too died of a broken heart. For Israel, 1967 is a military success. But it redraws the map of the Middle East and mires the region in a never-ending cycle of occupation, terrorism, and reprisal. Cairo. After midnight on the 14th of May, 1967, an official convoy speeds to the residence of the President of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser. Anwar al-Sadat, the Speaker of the National Assembly, carries a startling warning from Egypt's powerful ally, the Soviet Union. The Soviets have told Sadat that Israel is poised to invade Syria. Sadat rushes into Nasser's office with the news. He finds him there with his military commander-in-chief, Field Marshal Amer. In a region where countries are struggling to get out of poverty, Egypt is said to be the most powerful. It has a mutual defense treaty with Syria. And in fact, tensions are high these days between Israel and Syria. The Soviet warning about an Israeli attack seems believable.
ناصر أخذها كحقيقة ولذلك ابتدأ يواجه الموقف على أنه لمواجهة عدوان هيتم في سوريا ومصر نظراً للتحالفات العربية لابد أن يتحرك وإلا يبقى موقفه موقف صعب جداً أمام العرب.
Amer assures Nasser that the army is strong enough to confront Israel. The order is given. The Egyptian army is mobilized. The Egyptian army is already stretched thin because of its involvement in a guerrilla war in Yemen. They are forced to call up thousands of reservists, many of them from the densely populated Nile Delta. Thousands receive their mobilization orders. They are primarily poorly trained peasants like Fatih Abu El-Rish.
الفلاح ده كان معدوم. عبد الناصر اداله ارض. عبد الناصر كان مع الناس الفلاحين الغلابه دي. فطبعا كنا بنحب عبد الناصر سواء رئيس جمهوريه او مش رئيس جمهوريه. كنا بنحبه.
In the first 48 hours, 3 Egyptian divisions cross into the Sinai. 45,000 soldiers, 300 state-of-the-art tanks, 450 armored personnel carriers, and masses of Soviet artillery. The television cameras are there to film it all. It seems more like a parade than a serious military advance. But it's far more serious than a parade. By deploying so much military power so close to Israel, Nasser has made a move that will have serious consequences for him and for the entire region. On the 15th of May, the Israelis hold their Independence Day military parade in Jerusalem, only a few hundred meters from the Jordanian border. Levi Eshkol, Prime Minister and Defense Minister, reviews the troops. Eshkol now knows about the Egyptian mobilization.
אני יושב ליד לוי אשכול על היציע באצטדיון. המצעד מתחיל לצעוד, והנה קצין ניגש ולוחש על אוזנו של אשכול. אשכול מרים גבה, נראה קצת מודאג.
What was behind Egypt's move? Must Israel respond to this challenge? In public, Eshkol seems unmoved. Like the rest of the country, he takes part in Independence Day festivities. His fellow citizens are unaware of the impending danger. On the advice of his chief of staff, Yitzhak Rabin, Eshkol mobilizes 1 armored division and waits for more news. 3,000 men are called up as part of Israel's well-trained reserve army. One of them, Yehoshua Bar Dayan, an Israeli reservist, starts to write a diary.
At 11 p.m. at night, a telephone rings. I have to leave in 10 minutes and help mobilize my unit. Gila is shaking. I am nervous too. It takes all night to mobilize everybody. You climb stairways, knock on doors. There are frightened faces. Husbands enter the children's room to kiss the kids, trying to calm everyone, to reassure them. At 6 a.m., I'm back at home. I kiss Gila and Yariv, who wave to me from the balcony.
Meanwhile, the Israeli Intelligence Committee meets at the Ministry of Defense. They are not inclined to see Egypt's move as a prelude to war.
וניתחנו את המצב, ואי שם סמוך לחצות של אותו לילה, הוצאנו את הנייר הראשון שמדבר על המהלך המצרי, שאותו ראינו כמהלך חד משמעי מצרי, שמטרתו לא להסלים, אלא להפך.
Gazit's analysis is that war is not imminent. But the Israeli population is already on edge. That night, as Gazit drives home, he hears the song, Jerusalem of Gold. Newly composed and very popular, its words evoke a mythical Jerusalem, an empty city waiting for its exiled sons to return. On his side, Nasser has checked Soviet intelligence and finds no Israeli troops on the Syrian border. War could have been avoided, but the Arab world has been roused by Egypt's mobilization. Nasser, the hero of the masses, doesn't want to let them down. He cannot stop what he's started.
وسبب من ضمن السبب الرئيسي لحب الشعب العربي لعبد الناصر هو القومية العربية. القومية العربية يعني أشعلت النار في قلوب العرب في كل مكان، إنهم ممكن يبقوا كعرب قوة ما وليس كأقطار مختلفة.
Nasser feels he can use this situation to increase the profile of the Arabs on the international scene.
A new Middle East crisis arises as President Nasser of Egypt tells a wildly cheering crowd in Alexandria that Egypt has seized
For
the
Nasser,
internationally
this
owned
is familiar
Suez Canal.
territory,
His announcement
reminiscent of the
touches off a
Suez
rapid
crisis
series
of
reprisals and
1956,
counter-reprisals.
when Nasser took a
Britain
tremendous
freezes all
gamble
Egyptian
and
funds,
nationalized
and
the
Egypt
Suez
retaliates
Canal,
with the same
the
measure.
vital waterway
France,
that
sluggish and
delivers
bitter
oil to
protests
the
discuss
West.
the biggest threat this year has posed to world peace.
In October of 1956, the Israelis, the British, and the French joined forces to recapture the canal.
The Egyptian army was defeated.
The UN stepped in, and a ceasefire was declared, and Nasser turned a military defeat into a political triumph.
Notez qu'en 56, c'est quand même une victoire. Dans la mesure où aussi bien les deux grandes puissances impériales qui ont dominé la scène politique jusqu'à la Seconde Guerre mondiale, la Grande-Bretagne et la France, ont obligé de se retirer, et bien plus, les troupes israéliennes ont obligé de se retirer aussi, et le canal de Suez a été nationalisé.
Nasser's victory was incomplete. He was forced into two major concessions: keeping a UN peacekeeping force on Egyptian soil and allowing the Straits of Tiran to stay open, even to Israelis. For 10 years, this strategic spot stayed remarkably peaceful, thanks to the UN peacekeepers. But all that is now about to change as Nasser makes his next move.
I got a phone call from Brigadier General Sharkawi, who was my Egyptian liaison officer, to say that he'd had a call from the general headquarters in Cairo.
That day, General Sharkawi brings a message from Nasser. It demands that the UN peacekeepers withdraw from their posts along the border. In case of war, Egypt says it cannot guarantee the UN's safety.
My reaction was very cool. And so I said, I will send this to the Secretary General and ask for his instructions. Then Sharkawi said, but sir, what do you think about it? So I thought very rapidly, and I said, have you thought through what the consequences of this problem are going to be? Have you worked it out, how you're going to deal with Israel after you move your troops on the frontier and UNF moves away? What response the Israelis are going to have? Oh, sir, I will meet you for lunch in Tel Aviv next.
Nasser's move puts the UN on the spot. The organization is strongly influenced by non-aligned powers and the newly independent former colonies for whom sovereignty is a sacred belief. The UN Secretary General, Utant, goes along with Egypt's request.
These are the last pictures taken of members of the United Nations Emergency Peacekeeping Force in position on Egyptian territory at the Gaza Strip frontier with Israel. We filmed them last
A few
Friday
days later,
afternoon,
the peacekeepers
the 19th
pack
of
up.
May, the time 2 p.m.
From the other side of the border, the Israelis watch as the last of the UN forces leave. There's nothing now between the Israeli army and the Egyptian army. Moving his troops raised the stakes. But by removing the UN troops, Nasser has now moved beyond the first international restraint of 1956. And the future is uncertain. The American CIA head of station in Tel Aviv, John Haddon, reports to his superiors. Nasser has crossed the line. It could lead to war.
For me, it was just like a little boy who's being held by his father, and the little boy is shouting, "Let me at him, let me at him." And he doesn't want to be let at him at all, but all of a sudden the father lets go of him. And then they were off and running, weren't they?
רק בערב, לאחר יומיים של שתיקה בישראל, מתפרסמת במהדורת החדשות של השעה 7 תגובה
Eshkol
רשמית
is at
ראשונה.
home when he learns about the withdrawal of the UN. He worries that events may be taking on a life of their own. His military advisor, Colonel Lior, is with him. He writes in his journal.
That evening, Eshkol opened his heart to his deputy, to me, and mainly to his wife, Miriam.
ופתאום ככה הסתובב וצעק, יש מלחמה, את לא מבינה?
אשכול אמר את זה.
אשכול אמר, יש מלחמה.
דובר צה"ל הודיע הערב כי בעקבות כניסת צבא מצרי רב לקדמת
Like
סיני,
Nasser, Eshkol knows that the departure of the UN has brought the region closer to war. Any military move could easily spiral out of control. With the UN gone, the Straits of Tiran are now under direct Egyptian control. Nasser is tempted to push his luck, to close the straits to Israeli ships. But Nasser is worried. Is the army ready? What if Israel attacks? Once again, Field Marshal Amer declares his troops are ready.
كتير بيقول لك المسؤول الأوحد عبد الناصر. وأنا أؤكد لو أن القيادة العسكرية قالت إنهم غير مستعدين، إنهم غير أكفاء لمواجهة الموقف، صدقني إن لم يكن عبد الناصر يجسر إنه يطور الوضع السياسي إلى ما كان عليه.
Nasser has little choice except to trust in his military, especially in Field Marshal Amer. They are old comrades in arms, seizing power together 15 years before. Their roles are fixed. Nasser takes care of politics, Amer takes care of the army. To break this pact could cause a dangerous shift in the balance of power in the country.
أنا لاعب شطرنج. كنت ألعب سياسة، ما ألعبش عسكري. كنت قادر على ان انا العب سياسه، وسبق من 52 ل 67 لعبت السياسه في امور كثيره. انما اللي جعلني في هذا الموضوع هو ما قاله عبد الحكيم عامر عن قدره القوات المسلحه.
But the Egyptian military was not all it seemed to be. It was large but ill-trained and less powerful than the Israelis.
المصيبة إنهم ما كانوش قادرين يحسبوا توازن القوى، لأن the balance of power مش كتير يقدروا يحسبوها، مش كتير. المسألة مش مسألة عددية، لا ده عشان تحسب توازن القوى دي عاوزة خبرة كبيرة جدا جدا. ليه؟ لأن 3 دبابات زائد 3 دبابات مش لازم يكونوا 6.
These are critical moments for Nasser. He knows that closing the Straits of Tiran could easily provoke a war. The Straits are Israel's only southern access to the sea. Will the world allow Nasser to close the Straits? Will it be a repeat of the Suez crisis? He makes a decision, one that will be fateful for him and for Egypt. Speaking to a group of pilots, Nasser makes his announcement. He will close the Straits of Tiran. Nasser is accompanied by Amer, as if telling the world that he has confidence in his army. Nasser declares, if the Jews want war, we welcome them. Eshkol's military advisor, Colonel Lior, is awakened at 2:30 a.m. with the news of the closing of the Straits.
I sat in bed, the blood gushing in my temples. I knew it was irreversible. Israel was going to war. I was asked to come down to the pit. I thought war was going to break out that same day. We cannot give the Egyptian army more time to organize. I woke up Eshkol on the direct line. Sir, the Egyptians have closed the Straits.
At 8 in the morning, Eshkol meets with his generals, including his chief of staff, Itzhak Rabin, and the head of intelligence, Aharon Yariv. They tell him Israel must respond with force in order to maintain the balance of power in the region. Rabin recommends going to war immediately. Eshkol listens to the generals, but asks a simple question. Are the Straits really blocked? An oil tanker is expected to arrive at the Straits soon. If the Egyptians block it, it could be the reason to go to war. For the military, however, it doesn't really matter whether the Straits are actually blocked. It's the symbolism that counts.
It was announced that it was closed. And for the Israelis to pull back with that happening, you can't do it. You can't, then you've been, in effect, you've been defeated, haven't you?
What's now going to happen, Mr. President? Do you think the Israelis are going to attack the Arabs?
Well, we are waiting for them. We left for them the initiative completely. We are waiting for them.
In Israel, the question worrying the generals is whether failing to respond to Nasser will make Israel appear weak.
It's not just the freedom of navigation that is hanging in the balance. Israel's credibility, determination, and capacity to exercise its right of self-defense are also being tested.
After a long and tense meeting, the government decides to delay any decision on war for 48 hours. Israel's foreign minister, Abba Eban, is dispatched on a lightning trip to Europe and North America. The hope? Israel's allies will force Egypt to step down and reopen the straits. In Egypt, the state radio is mobilized to push the government's policy on Israel.
صوت العرب كان يزيد على أنه بيخاطب الجماهير العربية لتحاول أن تكون مع مصر عندما يحدث أي قتال. الجماهير كانت متحمسة جدا وكانت واثقة من أن قواتها المسلحة تستطيع أن تنتصر. حتى إحنا كنا في الميديا أيضا
من الواضح أن عبد الناصر كان هو القوة الروحية لمنظور عربي جدا متقدم في ذلك الزمن. يعني كان العربي من المحيط للخليج الموديل النهائي للشخصية التاريخية المنتظرة هو عبد الناصر.
أبناء الشعب العربي هم السبب فيما حدث في شرق.
فبالتالي صحيح كثير من الناس كانوا يقولوا بأنه هذا بلا بلا بلا، بس بالحقيقة العالم العربي كليته كان ماشي معه. يعني العالم العربي كان مستعد فعليا يضحي بنفسه في سبيل مشروع ينجح.
No one wanted Nasser's project more than the Palestinians. Since 1948, when the State of Israel was born, most of them had been living as refugees in Jordan and the Gaza Strip.
The case of the Arabs of Palestine. You know, here in this part of the world, in the Arab country, no one accepts this idea about forgetting all the past, all the 20 years, and close our eyes and leave everything as it is. We insist about the rights of the Arabs of Palestine.
In 1967, Nasser raises the hopes of Palestinians that they can return to their homes and farms.
The people were very, they were looking towards Abdel Nasser. If you took a popularity poll, there were probably more Palestinians supported Nasser than Egyptians. You know, I mean, he was an incredible hero. I remember seeing his face on prayer rugs. I was shocked by that. What are you doing with the face of Abdel Nasser on a prayer rug? I mean, he was such an extraordinary hero, as if he could do no wrong.
By May of 1967, the look and feel of the street in Cairo is changing. And so is Egyptian radio and television. It's still used to rouse the masses, but it is also being aimed at Israel. Egyptian radio has started to broadcast in Hebrew.
ناصر ناصر نحن أحريقة نشميد إتخم نصرف إتخم نشحق إتخم عدك.
This propaganda is having an effect in Israel. In fact, with no Israeli television network, even Arabic television shows from Egypt are being closely watched.
פותח, אתה רואה את שידורי הטלוויזיה המצרית, אתה רואה את החגיגות ברחובות, אתה רואה את נאסר יושב בביר גפגפה עם הנשרים הצעירים, טייסי המיג 21, כולם בחליפות ג'ים, מוכנים לצאת לקרב, מחייכים מאוזן עד אוזן. ראית את המסות של טנקים נכנסות לסיני.
Egyptian editorial cartoons are being reprinted in Israel. They also frighten Israelis with their fantasies of Israel crushed, pierced, and destroyed in a coming war. Israelis prepare for the worst. Rabbis consecrate parks to serve as mass graveyards. People are called to donate blood, then dig trenches. By now, most of the army has been mobilized.
אני זוכרת שמאוד חששתי לצאת מהבית. הרחובות היו כמעט ריקים, זה היה כמו לנסוע בעיר רפאים. אני זוכרת שאני ככה בליבי אמרתי, אם אני אדע שנכבשנו, משהו כזה, אני אפתח את הגז. ונמות כולנו, יחד. אני לא אתן לילדים שלי שיפגעו, וגם אני לא רוצה ליפול בידיים שלהם, וזהו, נעשה משהו כזה.
הפגנות אהדה והזדהות עם ישראל במאבקה נערכו ברבות מערי מערב אירופה. בהולנד הפגינו אלפים לנוכח קונסוליית ישראל.
The Arab propaganda has a deep impact beyond Israel. For many around the world, it ignites a fear that another Holocaust is in the making.
وإسرائيل استفادت من الجانب الأول من الخطاب، يعني الجانب الجماهيري، لتقول للعالم ولأوروبا بشكل خاص وللغرب إن العرب يريدون أن يلقوا بنا في البحر. ومن سوء الحظ أن بعض قادتنا يعني قالوا هذا الكلام، ولكن نحن لا في ذلك الوقت أنا لم أكن أصدق بهذا الكلام. وإسرائيل يعني استغلت هذه الفرصة لتنقل هذه الصورة إلى الصحف الأوروبية ووسائل الإعلام الأوروبية التي أعادت نوعا ما مسألة الهولوكوست.
Young Jewish volunteers pour into Israel.
I'm just going there because I feel, the need to go there at this particular time.
What are you going to do when you get out there?
Whatever they ask me to do.
I feel that I identify strongly with Israel, and I feel that they need me perhaps now more than they will next year.
הייתה מין תחושה של ערב משהו, זאת אומרת, הרגשה הייתה, כל רגע יקרה משהו. זאת אומרת, אין כבר זמן, הדברים כבר עומדים על הקצה, משהו הולך להתפוצץ.
But if Egyptian propaganda is frightening both Israelis and Jews around the world, it's not having the same effect on Israel's military command. Unlike the Israeli public, they are quite confident. Their private assessment: Israel is much stronger than its enemies. It's an opinion that the military keeps to itself.
אצלנו, במערכת הצבאית, הייתה לנו תמונה מאוד מאוד מציאותית של הערכת יחסי הכוחות הצבאיים. לא היה לנו שום פקפוקים, שום ספקות בנושא הזה, ביטחון מוחלט במה שהולך לקרות, ואיש לא העלה אפילו בחלום הכי שחור שלו איזושהי סכנה קיומית.
Eshkol is caught in a dilemma. As defense minister, he knows that his army has little to fear from the Arab forces. But as the prime minister, he has to deal with a population that's growing more frantic every day.
אתה חש שמתחילה איזו תסיסה שמתחילה להיות מכוונת נגד אשכול ונגד הדרך שהוא מושך ומושך ומושך עוד יום, ומתחילה להיות איזו מין שאלה, תנו לנו גנרל, תנו לנו מנהיג צבאי.
The papers ridicule Eshkol. He is portrayed as an indecisive leader, crushed by his enemies while he sleeps. Colonel Lior writes,
"These were very tough hours and days for Eshkol. Even his best friends from his own party demand he give up the defense ministry. He does not understand why. What had he done? He knows no one can blame him for putting the country in danger. Pressure is mounting. he is more and more isolated.
Meanwhile, in Cairo, Nasser is also under increasing pressure. On the 23rd of May, Entente comes for last-minute negotiations, hoping to avert war. After a day of meetings, Entente and UN Forces Commander General Riquet fail to move Nasser. But they gain a rare insight into his predicament. After the press photos, Nasser invites the men to a private dinner. They are the last foreigners to speak with him before the war.
I think the main points that really came out of it was, one, that he was under tremendous political pressure. He said that the military are insisting that he go to war. Can't remember exact words, I'm sorry, but he definitely indicated that he was afraid of a coup, assassination. I think this was also in his mind.
Nasser is now at a precipice. The Arab world is behind an invasion of Israel, and his military is clamoring for war, to strike the first blow. But Nasser hesitates. What will the Soviets do if he starts a war? Nasser decides to send his Minister of Defense, Shams Badran, to Moscow to test the waters. Will the Soviets support Egypt? If they say no, then Nasser has a good argument for waiting. According to the diplomat Pavel Akopov, Badran gets his response from Soviet Premier Kosygin in no uncertain terms.
Не можем дать вам согласие на то, чтобы вы нанесли превентивный удар по Израилю и тем самым начать военные действия. Во-первых, если вы нанесете превентивный удар, начнете первым военным, вы будете агрессором. Это противоречит нашей политике, и мы не можем поддержать агрессора.
As Nasser turns to Moscow, Eshkol turns to Washington. Foreign Minister Abba Eban meets with an American president already embroiled in the war in Vietnam. But will Johnson send ships to force open the Straits of Tiran?
He expressed to me a sense of his own impotence that I had never heard either before or since from an American leader. He said that he was actually contained and frustrated by the Vietnam War. He said, I will not be able to carry out what was then his policy of forcing the Straits with American power. And he then said in a kind of Delphic oratory sort of mood, Israel will not be alone unless it decides to be alone.
עיתונאים וצלמים רבים ציפו בנמל התעופה לוד לשר החוץ מר אבא אבן ושובו משיחותיו עם ראש ממשלת...
Johnson's words aren't much help to Eshkol in his debates with the generals. Eshkol is now running out of options. Johnson has put the onus on the Israelis. The dilemma is always the same. Should there be a preemptive strike or not? Eshkol's cabinet votes. Half are for war, half against. Meanwhile, outside his windows, there are demonstrations demanding that he be replaced as defense minister by Moshe Dayan, a general.
מסביב לרחוב הירקון 110. הבו לנו את דיין, הבו לנו את דיין. הבו לנו את דיין. וזה נעשה במדרכה ליד רחוב הירקון 110, ששם יושבת לשכת המפלגה, ואנחנו שומעים את הצעקות האלה.
The question of letting Dayan into the government dominates the political agenda of the country. Having General Moshe Dayan, the hero of the Suez conflict of 1956, as defense minister, seems to a frightened Israeli public to be the only answer.
אני מוכרח לומר, אנחנו ניסינו להגן על אשכול, אבל הייתה איזו נקודת אל חזור.
Eshkol has one last chance to calm the public's fear and to keep the defense portfolio. He will go on radio and address the nation. His first public speech since the crisis began.
הבאנו אותו לאולפן, הכנסתי אותו, עשיתי איתו 2 חזרות. בשתי החזרות הוא היה מצוין. ממש קרא את הטקסט באופן בהיר, נהיר, אין כמוהו. היה יוצא מן הכלל טוב.
על השולחן כזה היה, ישב חגי, ישב אשכול, וישב ראש לשכתו של אשכול, עדי יפה.
And then it was time to go on air.
הממשלה קבעה הנחיות להמשך הפעילות המדינית בזירה העולמית.
אשכול קרא את הטקסט בשידור חי יוצא מן הכלל טוב, עד שהגיע אל מילה אחת מאוד מאוד פשוטה, להשגת הכוחות המצריים. כאן הוא הפסיק, פנה לאחור ושאל, עדי, מה זה להשגת? אמר לו, אשכול, אתה בשידור חי, סגרתי את המיקרופון. אז הוא חזר אל זה, ואז יצא גמגום, גפונן את המקום, והמשיך לקרוא. זה היה הברוך הגדול.
ומהגמגום הזה אין לך מושג, בתולדות המין האנושי לא הצליחו להפוך גמגום כזה לשערורייה לאומית מן המדרגה הראשונה.
It is a horrible broadcast, writes Colonel Lior.
Eshkol, with his stuttering, conveyed more insecurity and confusion. I heard that soldiers at the front burst out crying. Eshkol's opposition exploits this as much as it can.
And the night isn't over. Eshkol has to face his military command and explain himself. Lior calls it the night of the generals.
It is night, but in the war room, even the day is night. The neon tubes show the generals in this ugly light.
The generals declare that Israel is losing its power to deter its enemies. The country must answer Nasser's threat. Eshkol responds. And with his back to the wall, he speaks more strongly than he's ever done. Since when does Israel make preemptive strikes? I do not accept the argument that just because a large Egyptian army is sitting in the Sinai, that we have to go to war. Deterrence does not mean that you always have to act. How long will we live by our swords? You asked for more weapons, you got them. You asked for 100 planes, you got them. You asked for tanks, you got them. But you did not get them, so that one day we can say, now we can destroy the Egyptian army.
בעצם היה מעין פוטש שקט של המטכ"ל. בסופו של דבר היה ברור שאשכול איננו במצב כזה שהוא מסוגל לעמוד נגד כולם. ולעמוד נגד הצבא זה דבר מסובך עד היום. בימים ההם זה היה דבר כמעט בלתי אפשרי. מה זאת אומרת? הצבא העצום והגדול והנורא והקדוש אומר שאין ברירה אלא לצאת למלחמה, ואשכול הגמגמן הזה, הוא רוצה לספר לצבא מה טוב ומה צריך, ואם מלחמה היא כן הכרחית או לא הכרחית. לא היה לו סיכוי.
In a move that takes everyone by surprise, Jordan's King Hussein invites himself to Cairo to meet with Nasser. The two men haven't spoken in years. For Nasser, Hussein is little more than a comic opera figure, a puppet of the English and the Americans. Just a few days earlier, Hussein had said to Western diplomats that Nasser's closing of the Straits of Tiran was insane, that it would end badly for the Arabs, that they were not ready to fight Israel. But here he is, in Cairo, ready to join in with Nasser.
أعتقد أنه جلالة المغفور له كان عنده شعور أنه إسرائيل تحضر إلى حرب، وأن الحرب ستقع نتيجة استغلال إسرائيل للظروف التي ذكرت، وكان عنده قناعة أنه هدف إسرائيل الرئيسي هو الضفة الغربية والقدس.
For King Hussein felt that to defend the West Bank, he needed Arab support. That Arab support wouldn't be forthcoming unless he mended his fences with Nasser, who was, of course, perceived by the Arab masses as leader of the Arabs.
Hussein has joined Nasser for two reasons. He feels he's protected Jordan from an Israeli invasion, and he's gotten in tune with his population, more than half of whom are Palestinians. It's Hussein himself who suggests to Nasser that his forces be commanded by an Egyptian general. I conquered Jordan without sending a single soldier, Nasser said to the Soviet ambassador.
Abdel Nasser الحقيقة يعني فوجئ هذا القدر من التحمس والاندفاع من حسين. ما كانش يتصور إلى هذا القدر يعني. ولذلك لم ينسى له ذلك حتى مات عبد الناصر.
Israel now faces enemies on three fronts: Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. In the wings are both Iraq and Saudi Arabia. Israel is virtually surrounded. In just 2 weeks, Nasser had reversed the concessions he had made in 1956. The Arab nation was on the move, and millions of Arabs were behind Nasser. In Tel Aviv, Eshkol finally breaks down and agrees to give up the defense portfolio. Moshe Dayan becomes the Minister of Defense of a new government of national unity, which will manage the war.
One thing about the significance of this appointment is immediately clear. It's an outright victory for all those in Israel who favor the taking of a much tougher line against Egypt. Well, does General Dayan's appointment mean that Israel is now about to commit herself to war at all costs?
I should think that just now it's well, let's put it like that. It's too late and too early. Too late to react right away on the blockading of the state of Eilat, and too early to draw any conclusion of the diplomatic management or way of handling the matter.
Eshkol attends a crucial cabinet meeting. Will the country go to war or not? Dayan sets the tone. We cannot lose the initiative. The situation is getting more complex, he says. It won't matter that we shoot first, we have to act, and act as quickly as possible. The cabinet votes. 12 are in favor of war, and 2 are against. Diane proposes the official text of the decision. The government agrees to act militarily in a way that will relieve Israel from its encirclement. The government leaves to the defense minister and the prime minister the timing of the attack. This is it, writes Lior. The decision cannot be undone.
I lay in bed reconstructing what had happened since we were on the balcony of the Prime Minister's office on the eve of Independence Day. I also thought about Levi Eshkol. In 3 weeks, he had withstood unimaginable pressures from home and abroad. He had suffered an incredible injustice. But at that hour of the night, there was no room for sentiment. At 6 a.m., the phone rings. It's the wake-up call I had ordered from the war room. For me, this call is the beginning. It is a sunny summer morning, but in 1 hour, a war will break out.
June 1967, the Middle East is about to go through a major upheaval. In just 6 days, thousands of men will die. The borders will be moved. The fate of the peoples of the region will change. Since the end of May, the Egyptian president, Gamal Abdel Nasser, has engaged in an arm wrestling with Israel. Encouraged by the leaders of his army, he mobilized the troops in the Sinai, closed Israel's access to the sea in the south, and ordered the departure of UN Blue Helmets. Early June, Jordan was put aside by Egypt and Syria. The sound of weapons is deafening. Israeli Prime Minister Levi Eshkol has made an effort to contain his military leaders, who are trying to meet Nasser's challenges. The generals know they have the means to crush the Arab armies. The people are worried. They are looking for a strong man. It will be a General Moshe Dayan, named Minister of Defense. He has nothing against war. War seems inevitable. A war whose consequences the Middle East continues to experience to this day. June 1967, the morning begins like any other morning in Cairo. A few hundred kilometers away, the Israeli Air Force has been working on a refined plan for years.
Before the flight, I leave all my emotions behind. Who I am, what I feel for those I love. None of that matters anymore. I'm concentrating solely on my mission.
At the first hour, almost all Israeli aviation takes off for a surprise attack.
That morning, I was having breakfast at home. The air attack began at 10 to 8. I heard it.
سامع الضرب.
The Israeli objective is to put Egyptian aviation out of harm's way. Objective: bomb all air bases at the same time. Well, first step, fly at low altitude to avoid radars. Next step, neutralize the enemy's airfields. Then destroy the planes one by one.
My target was right in front of me. The Tupolev bombers had to be located. Each one was the size of a Boeing 707 and was scheduled to bomb Tel Aviv. It was a great feeling to destroy them.
It was weird to see the Israeli planes. My first perception of war was when I saw the planes overhead at the field headquarters where I was stationed. There was not a single siren warning of their arrival.
During this time, Marshal Amir, the head of the Egyptian army, flies over the Sinai in a plane to prepare a war that has already begun.
I can't say I didn't expect it, but I didn't imagine it would be this bad. Not that much.
Until the last moment, Levi Eshkol opposed the war. The Israeli army's offensive is a little more isolated. The political solutions to the conflict are no longer up to date. In just 3 hours, the Egyptian Air Force is destroyed. It loses 280 of its most recent bombers and fighter jets. The generous Israelis had seen right. The Egyptian army was not prepared for such a war. Without air support, the Arab forces will not be able to prevail on earth. For Israel, acting on several fronts becomes possible. 30 minutes after destroying the Egyptian aviation, Israel can then launch its terrestrial offensive on the Sinai. Yoshua Badayana, an Israeli reserve soldier, is mobilized in Sinai. He holds a border post throughout the war.
Now that it's all happening for real, we're not afraid, we're thrilled. It's like a big mess. Dozens of tanks and armored vehicles are on the move. The dust suffocates us.
After the catastrophic destruction of the Air Force, the Egyptian Land Army is in a bad position. The front lines give way.
Suddenly we see our soldiers retreating. Nobody tells us what's going on, so we follow them. Our officers didn't have time to give us instructions to protect our positions. It all happened so fast.
But the population knows nothing of the army's reversals. The power controls the media. Suddenly, enthusiastic crowds invade the streets to celebrate the victories announced by Radio Le Caire.
We began broadcasting communiques from the Army's high command. That's all we could transmit. There was no information other than that coming from headquarters. We were told of great victories. We had shot down dozens of Israeli planes. Our forces were advancing in Sinai. Our commandos had penetrated Israeli territory. This gave us the impression that we were winning a great victory.
In Damascus, television crews are also delighted with the announcement of the great victory that the Arabs would be winning.
The President of the Republic came on TV and made a speech that was broadcast. He wanted to bolster the people's morale. He announced that the war had begun and that the next day we'd be going to Tel Aviv for lunch.
As for the Israeli civilians, they are kept in the ignorance of the great success of aviation. The only tangible and worrying element, sirens call them to shelter from any enemy bombardment.
Moshe Dayan, as Minister of Defense, gave an order. The order to observe complete radio silence on the first day of the war. There was not a single communique giving details of the army's action or its victories.
Army spokesman announces, since very early this morning, intense fighting has been taking place between Egyptian forces and ours.
The reason for this discretion was the fear of an immediate international reaction to impose a ceasefire.
The triumphant information of Radio Leclerc on the military situation arouses the enthusiasm of the Arabs in Jerusalem.
What are they saying on the radio about the situation?
23 planes for Israel.
23.
23 right now.
23 now. Planes? Airplanes.
Yes, airplanes.
What shot?
Yes.
الحقيقة احنا اليوم الأول كانت معنوياتنا عالية جدا لأنه
The reality is that our morale was excellent on the first day. All the information we received said that the Arabs were winning. Israel had jammed our military communications. We were totally dependent on the radio for information. The problem was that the voice of the Arabs, Egyptian radio, was transmitting false information.
أنا باعتقادي كان يعطي معلومات غير صحيحة.
The Jordanian army is under the orders of an Egyptian General Riyadh. But neither King Hussein nor General Riyadh have reliable information on the report of the military forces. King Hussein, now an ally of Nasser, has placed his army under Egyptian command. The Israeli government, which knows this perfectly, nevertheless mocks Hussein, staying out of the way.
In my memory, we received this message at 12:30, although the attack on Egypt had already begun a few hours earlier. Egyptian General Abdel Riyadh had already ordered Jordanian forces to attack.
3 hours after the start of the war, General Riyadh orders the Jordanians to bombard the Israeli part of Jerusalem. The war is no longer limited to Sinai, and Jerusalem is not a city like the others. Jerusalem is the historical capital of Palestine. It has been a pilgrimage site for centuries for the Jews, Christians and Muslims. In the year of the war, Israelis and Jordanians fought for the control of Jerusalem. They had to resolve to share the city, the western neighborhoods coming back to the Israelis, the eastern neighborhoods, including the old city, to the Jordanians. But it is in the south, in a demilitarized area under UN mandate, that the Battle of Jerusalem begins, a battle whose repercussions weigh on the entire region to this day. In his home, Badi Awad, an officer of the Jordanian army, has a painting that celebrates how, in 1948, his men defeated the Israelis. 19 years later, in 1967, he is back in Jerusalem.
I was personally ordered to occupy the UN headquarters south of Jerusalem. I had to take control of it to prevent an Israeli attack.
Badi Awad and his soldiers occupy the demilitarized outpost of the UN, a strategic location. The line marking the ceasefire concluded in Jerusalem in 1948 is thus crossed. The Israelis react well. How? This is the question. In the basement of the Ministry of Defense is the headquarters. A man plays a decisive role there. Moshe Dayan, Minister of Defense for 4 days, whose authority is reinforced by his great popularity. First of all, he intends to continue the war against Egypt without dispersing his forces on other fronts. But the situation in the Sinai is so advantageous to his army that he can send some of his troops to the Eastern Front in order to take back from the Jordanians the UN headquarters in Jerusalem. It is Colonel Akadar who is entrusted with this mission.
One thing was obvious to me. If I could counterattack quickly, I'd have the upper hand.
I gave my orders right in the middle of the battle. I was always with my soldiers. I was between 2 battalions giving orders from inside the enclosure. I'd go from trench to boost the morale of my men. I was always at the head of the battalion.
At the end of the afternoon, the Jordanians are defeated. Akadar seizes the UN headquarters and pushes the Jordanian army out of the south of the city. Dayan pushes the advantage. He brings in other reinforcements from the Sinai. Anan Porat is one of the paratroopers who arrived from the Sinai.
We went up to Jerusalem in dust-covered buses. The whole bus is filled with the song Jerusalem of Gold. The song is about water springs that have dried up, of Jerusalem's deserted central square. I mean, none of these things were on anyone's mind at the time.
The song Jerusalem Gold is now very popular. His political message is clear. The Arab city does not exist, it is empty, waiting for its Jewish children to return to it. The Battle of Jerusalem changes the character of the war. In the Sinai, it was a military strategy affair. Now, it is a matter of national identity, invoking the religious dimension of the city for the Jews. At the square, Gamal Abdel Nasser and the President of the Parliament, Anwar Sadat, are both informed of the extent of the losses suffered. When Nasser learns of the reality of Israeli success in the Sinai and the destruction of his army, he abstains in the first instance of any declaration and any public appearance. As for Sadat, he observes from his window the people of the Sinai who celebrate the blows carried by the Israelis. In his diary, he writes,
I was stunned. I was heartbroken to see the crowd singing and dancing to the news of an imaginary victory.
Despite this, neither he nor the government nor the army decide to inform the Egyptians of the enormity of the failure. The same evening, in the air raid shelter of the parliament, the government of the National Union appointed the day before the war gathers. The order of the day: what will have to be done with Jerusalem once it is conquered? Some ministers want Israel to take over the whole city. Others believe that it should be under international control. Eshkol, on the other hand, knows that the debate is already closed. Dayan, who does not participate in the meeting of the Council of Ministers, has already created a fact that will lead to the occupation of all of Jerusalem. The session is held late in the evening. Colonel Leo writes in his diary,
I realize that this debate is probably one of the most important in our history. The ministers are discussing what Jerusalem will be like for generations to come. They are not prepared for such a discussion. They have no working documents, and they have no knowledge of the plans, whether political or military.
After the arrival of Sinai's paratroopers as reinforcements, the Israeli offensive is launched. For many of them, it is an opportunity to go back to the failure of 1948 and finally achieve the conquest of the historical city of Judaism. On the Israeli side, there are paratroopers like Yaki Hetz.
It was as if I couldn't feel the earth beneath my feet, as if I were forcing my way through water. I fired a shot just to regain my confidence.
Not far from there, Ghazi Rubaya is at the head of a company of the Jordanian army in charge of blocking access to the old city.
I had a choice. Either my men could be killed on the spot, or I could find a way out. What to do? The Jews were coming in from all sides. The morale of my soldiers was at an all-time low.
At daybreak, the Jordanian defense was broken. Both sides suffered heavy losses.
I was shocked. I tried to understand what was happening. For me, the aim of the war was to survive. I never took part in any commemorative ceremonies afterwards. Even a year later, I couldn't stand the victory music. I refused to listen to Jerusalem of Gold. I turned off the radio. I was desperate. The war was a terrible blow.
Those who listen to my account of the war can't realize the magnitude of the tragedy, the ferocity of the battle, the fear of hunger, responsibilities. Defeat is bitter. These psychological effects didn't leave us for long.
With the Jordanians having lost control of the access routes to Jerusalem, the siege of the old city could begin. It was only a matter of hours. In 1967, Abdullah Schleifer, an American journalist, ran an English-language Arab newspaper in Jerusalem, the Palestine News.
I saw a plane flying at low altitude. It narrowly passed over the dome of the rock, continued its flight, and on the way up dropped bombs that destroyed military positions. The last held by the Jordanians protecting access to the old city.
By morning, most of the Jordanian defenders had left Old Jerusalem.
We arrived here late morning. We came from the hill where Augusta Victoria Hospital is located, after passing through the Quai d'Oran Valley and entered through the Lion Gate. We felt we were making history, to write a new chapter in the Bible.
All of a sudden, I heard a huge hubbub and realized that the Israelis had entered the city. Then came the cries of victory, exaltation and firing. We could see Israeli troops deploying in the Sharif harem. They could be seen taking prisoners, undoubtedly notables, as the harem was the last strategic position. This was the last command post, the governor and what remained of the civilian leadership.
The soldiers find a small passage leading from the Temple Mount to the Wailing Wall. Even young secular Israelis are overwhelmed by religious fervor.
Next to me, I see a member of a kibbutz, a left-wing kibbutz, who asks, "Hanan, what prayer are you doing here?" I say, "Pray." "But I don't know how to pray," he replies. "Say Shema Israel." And he repeats, "Shema Israel, our God." Frankly, I don't think I've ever heard such a prayer in my life.
I'm standing here with my family, holding up my American passport and saying, "I'm American, I'm American." And they're shouting le toit in English. They want to go on the roof, even though they're still shooting. And then you see it in all the Israeli history books. They go up to raise the flag.
Israeli soldiers film their euphoria with their amateur cameras. By taking the Wailing Wall, they feel they have liberated the most sacred site in Judaism. A renewed religious dimension thus permeates Israeli nationalism. And right next door is one of Islam's holiest sites, the Haram Sharif, or Great Sanctuary. Years later, the intertwining of religious fundamentalism and nationalism would have an explosive effect.
King Hussein had always considered himself a Hashemite leader. He is a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. And the protection of Islam's holy sites in Jerusalem was the responsibility of the Hashemites. History will record that these holy sites were lost during his reign.
If we're going to live, we're going to live with honor. If we have to die, we'll die with honor. For our nation, for our rights, and forever.
The generous, victorious Israelis Moshe Dayan, Uzi Narkis, and Yitzhak Rabin enter the conquered city. Dayan is determined to make this a moment to remember. Army photographer Ilan Brunner was dispatched to the scene to take a symbolic photo.
We had gone about 10 meters beyond the gate. Dayan stopped the group and said, "Ilan, please go ahead and take a photo of me entering the old city."
In this photograph, there's one big absentee, Prime Minister Levi Eshkol. It's still too dangerous to come here, he was told. The reality is that the heroes of the moment, the generals, don't want the man who sought a political solution right to the end on their side. At Amman headquarters, the Egyptian commander-in-chief is losing the war, while the elite Jordanian army is watching the disaster helplessly. The 5 brigades of the Jordanian Legion are reduced to rubble.
They screamed and fought violently. They almost came to blows. For the Jordanians, what was at stake in the battle was the very destiny of the nation.
The Israeli army's objective is now the entire West Bank. The Israelis encountered little resistance from the Jordanians. The command moves forward without the government's approval at every stage, and the officers advance without waiting for instructions from their headquarters. For Colonel Moshe Yotvat, the war had begun on the border between Israel and Jordan. After 9 hours, they were near Ramallah, in the heart of the West Bank, on the west bank of the Jordan River.
I took advantage of every opportunity that presented itself. That's how it worked for all the territories we took on the West Bank. And it all came together seamlessly, from one stage to the next. There was no detailed plan. Sure, there had been operational plans, but there was no plan to occupy the West Bank.
The Israeli army quickly took possession of these new territories. But unlike Sinai, here the population is large. The army intends to control strategic positions such as communication routes. Such is the case of the Jerusalem-Tel Aviv road, where 3 villages are located. What about the civilian population of 6,000 people living there? Repressing it is further away. Abu Rami was born in Amouas, the largest of these villages. In 1967, he was a high school student.
We'll go down the road to the house where I used to live. This is the house where I was born. This is it. This is the place of our home. All around here. Where there are trees.
The village of Amouas has been erased. The entire site is now a national park. Yosef Ockman witnessed the eviction of the villagers. Ockman is Israeli. With other inhabitants of his kibbutz, he had gone in search of a lost flock of sheep. Ockman is an amateur photographer.
I take the picture. What's happening is that I've heard friends in arms have been killed.
Everyone took guns, but I took my camera. I had no
What I remember is
weapons. What I remember, there were houses along the road, that there was a great density of construction right up to the top of the hill.
Myself, what I'm talking about with you is that I forgot everything in the house.
I'm telling you that I forgot everything in the house.
All the women I forgot.
There are women who forgot to put on their veils.
Wear my clothes.
Other women forgot to put on their shoes.
It was very shocking.
We were so shocked that it could happen that someone forgot their child.
Difficult for a man to forget his son's seed. I.e., people with...
It was like Judgment Day.
The Israeli army has always denied this operation. These photos are, however, proof that the villagers were forced into exile. Ockman has never been able to forget. Since then, he has never stopped digging up the evidence of what happened. But if nothing happened, as the army claims, how can we explain the destruction of these 3 villages? For Yosef Ockman, General Uzi Narkis, Commander-in-Chief of the Central Region, is responsible.
When Uzi Narkis visited us in kibbutz a few days after the war, I asked him, what was the reason for the destruction of Amouas? The war was over there. He replied, We're settling the score of 2-9 or 48.
The obliteration of these three villages is thus the first indication of the new era opening up in the West Bank. The control and appropriation of territories, even if it means evicting the inhabitants. In Sinai, Israeli forces break through the first line of Egyptian defense. Amir panicked and ordered immediate evacuation.
The withdrawal was not organized. An organized withdrawal means an ordered withdrawal to such and such a position. But in this case, the withdrawal was given without going into details, and it was up to the officers to decide on the ground. This led to a lot of confusion in Sinai.
The Israelis intercepted the evacuation order. Once the Egyptian army starts to withdraw, the Israelis set a trap.
Instead of sticking to the battle plan, we decided to surround the Egyptian army. We knew that the order to withdraw had been given and that they would have to try to escape our encirclement. Instead of attacking them, we waited for them to come to us.
Fatih Abu el-Rich has been retreating on foot for over 24 hours.
We waited in groups of 3 or 4. As we walked along, we would stop to look for food and water in the wrecked cars. Everyone was watching the sky. We feared an air attack. We didn't think about others. It was every man for himself.
"I'm driving over human bodies," cried Oshua Dayan. "There are human limbs, one next to the other." I crushed the face of an Egyptian soldier. His nose is sticking out and his eyes are open. I search for a word to describe this vision. Tens of thousands of Egyptians are taken prisoner. The Israelis are overwhelmed and decide to keep only the officers. Near El Arish airport, an Israeli soldier films these images.
This is it. This is it. That's it, that's it, that's it.
It was chaotic all the way to the banks of the Suez Canal. The Israelis told us to go home. They took a lot of prisoners, about 20,000, but then they let them go.
Tens of thousands of Egyptian soldiers returned home. The defeat, the destruction of the army. They witnessed firsthand the moment of truth arrived when the lie about the army's great successes could no longer continue. At the end of the afternoon, Nasser summoned the army's senior officers, starting with Marshal Amr. Nasser, looking very pale, explained to his tearful officers that they had to accept the ceasefire proposed by the UN, so far refused by Egypt.
He was very sad. He repeated, "If I had seen that the army was incapable of confrontation, I would have avoided it. I'm a chess player. I know how to play the political game, and I didn't have to go to war."
Just 3 weeks ago, Nasser was making confident statements to the world. For the past few days, he has not appeared in public. Defeat acknowledged, he must address the people and explain himself.
أيها الإخوة، لقد تعودنا معا في أوقات النصر وفي أوقات المحنة، في الساعات الحلوة وفي الساعات المرة، أن نجلس معا وأن نتحدث بقلوب مفتوحة.
I remember a cameraman crying as he filmed. The team leader of the cameramen had to take away his camera so that we could continue the missions.
Nasser resigns. He had barely finished his speech. Thousands, then hundreds of thousands of Egyptians take to the streets. These streets, in tears he cries out, they're begging him to stay.
We heard it on the radio. We wanted to go to Cairo to tell him you can't resign. He had to stay. It's like when your son has done something wrong and doesn't want to take responsibility. You have to face up to it and make amends.
A few hours later, Radio Cairo announced that Nasser would bow to the will of the people. The president would remain in office until all traces of Israel's aggression had been erased. But Nasser, politically and physically weakened, died 3 years later without having seen the Arab world recover from his defeat. The war with Jordan and Egypt ended after 5 days. Moshe Dayan had all the power. Israel now controlled Sinai, the Gaza Strip, and most of the west bank of the Jordan. All that remained was Syria, linked to Egypt by a military assistance pact. For fear that the Soviet Union would come to Syria's aid, Dayan preferred not to respond to Syrian bombardments in the north of the country. But a message from Nasser to the Syrian president was intercepted. "Accept a ceasefire, save your army," said Nasser. Dayan concluded that the Soviets had no intention of intervening. Hello?
Dayan told me that Israel is like a little mouse. There's a big ocean where the really big ones swim. They are the big fish, the whales, the dolphins. But Israel is a little mouse. She rushes out of her hole to grab something and then rushes back to her hole.
Zara.
Now that Egypt had accepted the UN ceasefire, Dayan knew he had very little time left to get his hands on the Golan Heights, a strategic position on the border between the two countries. He launched his troops into the assault. A few hours later, the red telephone at the White House is in full swing. It's President Kosygin with a curt message.
Basically, Kosygin said, if you want war, you'll get war.
Actually used those words. He said,
One, if you don't stop the Israeli attack in Syria, we'll have to react and we'll consider, I think the words were, unilateral military action.
And we will consider, I think his words were unilateral military action.
The Soviets are preparing to follow up their warning. Air Force General Vasily Rechetnikov was ordered to be ready for action.
I've been asked to prepare our squadrons and to mount bombs on our planes. We had to be ready to hit targets in Israel.
At the entrance to Israeli territorial waters, the Soviet fleet assembled 1,000 sailors to attack the Israeli port of Haifa. Captain Yuri Kripunkov was asked to find volunteers to go ashore and fight.
I built these brave men on...
I gathered my men on deck and told them, "Lads, it looks like we're going to be taking part in some very serious action. Those who are not prepared to risk their lives must step forward.
My head,
Only one step forward."
a man stepped out. Hosen.
We figured we would lose.
No, we figured we would have to build up a military force, especially an air force, to help Israel defend itself against joint action by Syria and the Soviet Union. The Sixth Fleet was in full maneuver at the time, steaming towards Gibraltar. We stopped it and sent it back towards Israel, not to support an Israeli attack on Syria, but to prepare to defend Israel against a possible Soviet attack. Very, very dangerous.
Very, very dangerous.
The back and forth between the USSR and the USA bought Israel precious time. The Golan Heights are occupied. The Israeli army continues to advance and enters the town of Koneitra, less than 70 kilometers from the Syrian capital, Damascus. Only then did Israel bow to pressure from the major powers and agree to a ceasefire. The helicopter taking AV Eshkol from the Golan to Tel Aviv flies over transformed territory. Eshkol felt a certain apprehension. It would be months before he fully understood the consequences of these changes. By then it would be too late. Like Nasser, he was politically and physically weakened and would die in 18 months. The ceasefire officially came into effect at 6 p.m. on June 10th. But the very same evening, the war took on a different face. It takes place in Jerusalem, where the Israelis want to reshape the old city to suit their own tastes, in the most sensitive place of all, the Wailing Wall at the foot of the Dome of the Rock.
I hear noise coming from the Mughrabi quarter, this quarter.
It's water. And I'm going
I can look out of the kitchen window.
to look out of the kitchen window, turn off the light.
J'éteins les lumières.
Open it. I look out of the
Je regarde par la fenêtre qui était un peu ici
side and I just get a view. And I see
et je vois des bulldozers starting to destroy houses.
and they're starting to destroy houses. And in the morning,
In the morning I could see better. Half the neighborhood was destroyed.
Until then, Jews had come to pray at the Wailing Wall in a narrow alley that could accommodate at most a few dozen worshippers at a time. Dayan, and with him most of the military and political leaders, now wanted to turn the Wailing Wall into a shining symbol of the return to the Israel of the Bible. To achieve this, they have no qualms about destroying the surrounding densely populated, centuries-old Arab quarter. By June of this year, over 1,000 residents had been born and raised in homes in this neighborhood near the Wailing Wall. Among them, Abdel Latif Said.
See that flag? My house was next to the flag on this corner.
Said and his family left their house when the army ordered them to do a search. But by morning, the neighborhood had given way to an esplanade in front of the Wailing Wall.
They told us they only wanted to search our houses. What we didn't know was that they intended to destroy them. In the morning, our furniture, all our belongings, lay under the rubble of our destroyed houses. All we had left were the pajamas on our backs.
If we live with honor.
It's a fact that there's a struggle here with deep religious roots. We can't ignore it. And if we don't recognize our religious, spiritual truth, then we'll have to leave everything to the Muslims and Christians.
And I slam and that's all?
You know, when I saw that destruction, I felt such dread.
And part of me...
As if I sensed that a completely new problem was being created. A completely new problem. By sous-titreur.com.
A whole new problem.
The Israelis may have believed that they would impose the existence of their state on the region. They had not imagined that war and occupation would result in the irrepressible development of a national consciousness among Palestinians demanding their own state. The combatants of the war of those 6 days of June and September have grown old. But their children have not finished suffering the consequences of the conflict.
We are a foreign transplant, and all around us, hundreds of millions rejected. And there's nothing we can do about it. Leaving here and handing the country over to them is not a solution. And if we stay, the conflict will never end.
It was a king, and that much is clear. In the end, we tried...
We tried to understand why we were deceived. We were lied to.
To do something known.
The sole aim of the Arab regimes was to stay in power. That's all.
And the Arab systems we tried were systems that only saw themselves as governing and were not about anything else.
Nasser has...
Okay, so Nasser screwed up and Hussein screwed up. But why do we have to fall into the trap of their mistakes and turn our lives into a never-ending hell?
Greeted the Guillemots flock to me.
40 years we've been living in this hell that never stops. Because of this damned occupation.
It's not true, it's not true.
40 years later, I'm convinced we were right to go to war.
It's not true, it's not true. It's not true, it's not true.
The Six-Day War makes me very proud.
It's not true, it's not true.
I'm delighted with the result, which has reshaped the Middle East. And in my opinion, the peace we've concluded with Egypt and Jordan is the consequence.
Let's produce bombs for the Great World War.
It's not true, it's not true, it's not true, it's not true.
I hope the situation suits us.
In all the countries of the world that have had similar experiences, the governments fall, and not in the Arab regimes. Arab regimes, this was the situation I had to face, along with millions of other citizens. Here we are in the middle of the lookout on a deserted road, dry. Not a cloud in the sky. No rain forecast. We found ourselves alone in the ruins of our ideas.
Subtitles by the Amara.org community.